special meeting of November 29, 2023 is now called to order. And this is a continuation of our meeting of November 15th concerning the draft housing element. And I'll begin with the roll call. Vice Chair Raspy.
Here.
Commissioner Hanson.
Here.
Commissioner Burnett.
Here.
And Commissioner Gatos.
Here.
And I am here as well. So we do have a quorum. And does staff have a presentation on the rules of decorum and civility?
Thank you. Yes, and so for the record, Commissioner Thomas is not with us this evening. For the benefit of the community, the Town of Los Gatos asks that you follow the town's meeting guidelines while attending town meetings and treat everyone with respect and dignity. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And we'll move on to the Pledge of Allegiance led by Vice Chair Raspy today. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So under verbal communications tonight, the public is going to speak on agenda item number 1, which we'll get to shortly. And I will explain the town's guidelines pertaining to verbal communications when we get to that point in the agenda. And so we'll now consider agenda item number 1, in which we're asked to consider and make a recommendation to the Town Council on draft revised 2023-2031 housing element and location townwide general plan amendment application GP-22-003. And do we have a staff report tonight on this matter? Thank you.
Good evening. The primary purpose of the item this evening is to consider and make a recommendation to the council on whether to adopt the draft revised housing element with modifications in response to the HCD draft preliminary review matrix that was received by the town on November 7th. On November 16th, the draft revised housing element was made available for a 7-day public review period ending on November 27th, as required prior to resubmittal to HCD. An addendum report was provided to the Commission yesterday, which contained public comments received during the 7-day review period, as well as the cover letter that was provided to HCD as part of the town's November 28th resubmittal of the draft revised housing element. Staff anticipates receiving HCD's comment letter this Friday, December 1st. The Town Council's consideration on the adoption of the draft revised housing element is tentatively scheduled for December 19th. A desk item was also provided to the Commission today with additional public comments received following the publishing of the addendum report, a copy of the response memorandum to the draft preliminary review matrix provided by HCD, and a copy of the technical memorandum regarding accessory dwelling units that was prepared by the Association of Bay Area Governments. This completes staff's presentation. However, we are available for any questions, as well as the town's housing element consultant, Veronica Tam.
Thank you, Ms. Schubman, and I'll ask my fellow commissioners if they have questions of you at this time. Commissioner Hanson.
Thank you for that. And I did want to compliment staff. The housing element looks as good as it ever has been. And hopefully we're going to be there with the HCD. I have some concerns about the timeline of the submissions, and it was also noted in public comments. My question for staff at this point is the draft without any changes between then and now was submitted to HCD on the 16th. They were told to consider the data submitted today. Is that correct?
So there was an informal submittal to HCD that occurred on November 16th, providing them with a copy of the draft revised housing element and also making them aware of when the 7-day review period would be occurring. This was what was offered to the town by our HCD reviewer to provide them with this informal submittal, knowing that the 7-day review period would be occurring, followed by the town's formal resubmittal to HCD.
Okay, so thank you for that. So my follow-up question is, if the actual submittal was today, or I guess the 20th yesterday. The actual submittal was yesterday. Given there was a fair amount of items left from the November 7th matrix for them to look at, how are they still going to be able to complete their review and get a letter by December 1st? That seems like not a lot of time given the past history you guys have recounted.
Thank you for the question. Yes, obviously we would have liked to get it to them sooner, but with the holiday, that did prevent some challenges in terms of timing. Our hope is that he'll be able to complete that review for the December 1st letter, so it does address many of those comments in the matrix, but ultimately we will find out when we receive that comment letter on Friday.
Is it possible that their comment letter could be, we're not ready to make a full comment on the submission?
And our consultant may want to also chime in, but once there's a formal submittal to HCD, they have very clear timelines that they have to follow. So there will be a comment letter that's provided to the town on December 1st.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions for staff? Commissioner Janoff.
So they're obligated to provide a comment letter on December 1st covering the September submittal. And is it fair to say that the portions of the draft that were resubmitted yesterday may not be considered or included in their December 1st comment letter?
Yes, there's that potential.
Thank you.
Other questions? Commissioner Burnett?
Yes, thank you. Question for staff. Can you go over again why we did have a planning commission meeting on the 15th then? Since there was a new matrix and there was work being done on the revised housing element the next day.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So when scheduling public hearings, they do need to be set and scheduled a significant period of time ahead of time so that we can make sure that we have the required public noticing, ads to the paper, and that takes several weeks in advance of the date of the hearing. In the case of the 15th, we were hoping that we would have the opportunity to meet with the town's reviewer to get some initial feedback. And so we're hoping to have the discussion on the 15th with some revisions. That didn't occur as early as we had hoped. And so we weren't able to present to Planning Commission the fully revised housing element based on that interim feedback. But that is why we recommended continuance to this evening, so that you have sufficient time, in this case nearly 2 weeks, to take a look at the full revisions that have been made in response both to the previous letter from HCD and the interim review.
Chair Hansen.
When we met on the 15th, you went through some changes to the site inventory and some other changes that you're going to make. And I believe they were all positive in terms of the draft that we just saw. And in particular, the affordable housing AFFH matrix looked great and all that. Now, given what Commissioner Janoff asked, they're commenting primarily on the draft that they received in early October. So given the changes in the site inventory, although we didn't add any new sites, what is the likelihood that they're going to be able to realistically give a thumbs up on this because they don't have a lot of time to review a couple of really important inputs?
Well, we are still hopeful. So thank you for that question. We are still hopeful that these additional changes that were prepared 2 weeks ago can be incorporated into the review that results in the letter on Friday. There still is a good chance of that. I think I will also invite Veronica Tam, our consultant, if she's available, to turn on her camera and join us to talk about how these interim reviews have worked with her and other agencies in the past.
Thank you, Jennifer. I think they've seen a lot of the revisions that we have made throughout that process, And I think it's based on, we try to respond very well with the matrix that they provided. I think the last set of changes are very specific. I am hoping that he would have the opportunity to review it. The reviewer contacted me this morning and asked me to make sure that the city is able to submit the revisions as soon as possible. And so I am, again, like, I'm hopeful along with staff that because he contacted me and gave us a deadline by the end of the day, that that we would be able to that he would be able to review those changes and incorporate that into the letter. So there is a good chance, but I would not be able to speculate whether he will, but there is a chance because he did ask and gave us a deadline today.
If I could ask a follow-up question, and thank you for that explanation. That was helpful. Since they're working from the matrix, I'm assuming that they're working primarily from the matrix that they gave us on November 7th. Is it typical in your experience that they would limit their review only to those items that weren't covered and not look at new things?
Correct. And that's what we usually do. And that's the reason why we always highlight. And that was the questions that he had asked me a few days before ahead of time too, if the changes would be differentiated from the previous revisions. And we usually use different highlighting to illustrate the different stages of the changes that we've made based on different versions of the matrix. And the reason why we do that with highlighting is to actually make sure that they focus on the latest revisions that address the latest matrix.
Okay, thank you very much.
Other questions? I have a couple for staff. Let me see if I can find that quickly. Oh, has the town received a response from HCD regarding the inquiry as to whether the housing element filing will be deemed to have been received at the end of the day on November 27th? There was a request from Mr. Paulson to HCD on that.
So we did submit yesterday, the 28th, and we did receive acknowledgement from our reviewer that it had been received yesterday. So the formal submittal of this interim draft is considered submitted yesterday, the 28th.
So that information, if I understand correctly, you're saying that HCD has agreed with the town's position that the submittal was on November 27th.
So it actually was formally submitted on the 28th. So there was the correspondence back and forth about that, sharing the preliminary draft previously and wanting to make sure that they did not consider the email on the 16th as being a formal submittal because we had not yet completed the 7-day review. The formal submittal of this interim draft with additional revisions was yesterday, the 28th. And they have confirmed that they received it on that date.
Okay, thank you. And one other point here. There was a comment from the public that the mid-cycle submission would start a new 60-day review period. Do you have a comment on that? This was in Exhibit 12, number 4 on page 2.
Thank you for the question. So in speaking and corresponding with our HCD reviewer, what was provided in email on the 16th was an informal submittal. It did not constitute an actual formal submittal. And we noted that the 7-day review period would be starting on that day and ending on a certain day. So no, it's not our understanding that it constitutes a new 60-day review period.
And through the chair, just to add, the formal submittal that was occurred yesterday does start a new 60-day clock.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Oh, and we might as well take this opportunity to ask staff about the consequences if this hearing was continued to a date in the future based on the expectation of input on December 1st, which is 48 hours away.
Thank you for that question, and I understand the interest in finding out what's in that letter. I think we're all eager to see it. Staff is recommending that Planning Commission make a recommendation on the draft housing element this evening because of an interest in allowing the Town Council to consider adoption of the housing element before the end of the year. Their final meeting is on December 19th. The deadline for submitting an ad to the newspaper for that meeting is actually tomorrow morning, first thing, and it is required by state law to include specifically what the Planning Commission recommendation is. So this really is the last date for us to be able to bring this for consideration by Town Council before the end of the year.
Okay, I see some hands up here. Let's start with Vice Chair Raspy.
Thank you, Chair. If I can follow up then, because it seems like we're pressing forward in quick fashion, which I take to mean that we're trying to avoid certain consequences. Can you remind us, and the public as well, what the consequences are for failing to timely put into place the housing element?
Thank you for that question. And I'll start, and the town attorney may have something to add. The goal here is to get a housing element adopted and certified as early as possible in order to avoid any additional builder's remedy applications. There are a lot of reasons that it is beneficial for the town to have a adopted housing element. And as the information that was provided to Planning Commission shows, there has been a lot of work that has been done over this last year to bring the draft housing element into compliance with state law. The long chart that was included in your addendum, for example, goes through section by section of the state regulations to show specifically how this updated housing element does address all of those components. And so while we do not have the final blessing from the state as of yet, the information that we have provided, we hope, will allow the Planning Commission to make a recommendation this evening.
Thank you for that answer.
Commissioner Hanson, then Commissioner Jenoff.
So a related question to that, there's been some misinformation, I think, that has been floating around about, what I heard is that we need to go as soon as possible, but there isn't an official deadline. And so I'm just asking staff to confirm the only deadline that I'm aware of is on January 31st of 2024 is the deadline to have the rezoning completed.
That's correct.
Which has been done with the exception of one site, which is not integral to the success of the site inventory. Okay.
And Commissioner Jenoff?
Thank you. I think we all want to see the letter on December 1st before the Planning Commission makes a recommendation. It seems prudent that we would have that information in hand before we would recommend a town council adopting the current draft. However, when I look at the progress that's been made between the original submission, the draft in September, and the relatively minor changes, but specific changes that were in our package today, I feel confident that we have a good document. I did before, but I feel even more confident now. My question to staff is, can the Planning Commission make a recommendation this evening to Town Council to adopt the November draft of the housing element with the condition that if the letter from HCD on December 1st is a no or non-compliance, that recommendation would not go forward?
That could be done. An alternative would be to adopt the resolution, and if HCD were to recommend significant changes, those changes could either be made before the town council meeting, or alternatively, the planning commission could meet again.
Thank you.
Okay, so my intent was to go forward with the public comment for tonight, and then following that, perhaps it would be appropriate for the commission to consider the procedural status of the hearing before we go into a detailed review of the matrix as a way to proceed. So with that in mind, I'll open the public portion of the meeting where members of the public are allotted up to 3 minutes to comment on agenda item number 1. And as at all of our meetings, the public's input is very much appreciated and is welcomed, and the comments are considered by the Planning Commission carefully. During tonight's meeting, any person may speak after being recognized by the chair, and no person other than the commissioner, staff, and the person having the floor shall be permitted to enter into the discussion. No member of the public is allowed to speak more than one time. And to assure the opportunity for all people to participate, there's no yielding of time to another speaker. We have several cards up here, but if you haven't already submitted one, please hand one to staff, and we'll be sure to include you. And when your name is called, please come to the microphone and state your name and address if you would, or you can speak anonymously. And in fairness, again, to all speakers, the comments are limited to 3 minutes. So I'll begin with Ms. Quintana.
To begin, I make some disclosures. I was a member of the GPAC for 2040, and I'm currently a member of the Historic Preservation Committee, at least until the 31st, and I'm speaking as an individual. I thought about what I was going to say today, all day today, and it kept changing. And I kept coming up to begin with some statements that just cliches that all seem to fit. One was, I feel like I'm in the middle of a skit of who's on first and what's on second. I feel like I'm trying to read and make comments on a moving target, and a moving target that isn't even all visible at one time. This is really getting to be ridiculous, and the more these halfway reports come out, the more complicated and bizarre this whole process has become. Really, I think that if, as the attorney said, you can meet again before the town council after the receipt of the comments from HCD, I would think that's what you would want to do. So you weren't just making a decision to approve something or recommend approval of something that you didn't even know what it was, so to speak. The other thing I want to say is that HCD's comments to me were focused on about 3 things. They were focused on the previous housing element evaluation, factors that prevent that are in the way of achieving, and the AFFH. But there were overlaps with all of them, and to me, reading through the revised text, there's a lot of it, but I don't think it adequately addresses HCD's comments, and I would be very surprised if they didn't make those comments. They seem to indicate that even the site inventory isn't approved yet because they need the analysis from those other evaluations before they can even address that. And one of the things that they commented on was the lack of zoning for multiple family. distributed evenly throughout the town. Shoot, I'm out of time, but I have a lot more to say. Okay.
Let's see if the commissioners have questions for you. I don't see any. We only have one other speaker card, so would you like to speak for another minute?
Yeah, let me see if I can get myself together here. Yeah, I think, to me, one of the problems with the analysis in the first place is that, like for AFFH, it's divided into little pieces all the way along. Each piece is answered. Each piece, compares it to the region and to the county, et cetera, et cetera. But there's no point at which all of that information gets re-aggregated up again and analyzed in a totality, because there are contradictions within each of those different sections. That's the analysis that I think the state is looking for. Also, in things that are in the way, so to speak, I've lost the word. We talk about them, but we don't give any specific examples. What are the zoning that the town has that impeded achieving our goals in the housing element, et cetera, et cetera? That the information is not specific enough.
Thank you for your comments. They're appreciated. And Mr. Fagot?
Good evening, and I'm speaking as a citizen of the town of Los Gatos. I'm not representing any group. And I did want to commend all of you for the work that you've been doing. It has been very difficult, I know, because of all the dynamic changes that are occurring. One of the things I would ask for is that Santa brings everybody a calendar and that they all use the same calendar for planning, because what we have is one that the town staff uses, one that HCD uses, one that the Planning Commission uses, the town council, and they don't mix together terribly well. For example, the November 15th meeting that you held was actually a very good and informative meeting, appreciated. However, we learned then and then the next day, the 16th, without citizen or council review, that the staff submitted the new draft to the HCD that had significant changes. So there wasn't, again, the opportunity to review. The public comment period of 7 days is before submission, not after or concurrent with the submission, as you just discussed a few minutes ago. Now learned tonight, yesterday was another submittal that was made. So I'm going to skip my notes because I think Ms. Quintana made a lot of very good points that there needs to be better coordination between the Planning Commission, the Housing Element Advisory Board, the town staff, and then to the council. And the council needs to give the final review and direction. But the citizens need an opportunity as well, as is outlined in the law. So again, I appreciate the challenges that you face and the work that you've done, but let's work together better going forward. A lot of lessons coming out of this are that trying to do the general plan and then doing the housing element, the sequence was not good. Let's work on one universal calendar that we can all work with together and put it in a logical sequence of feedback from the consultant, which was not provided earlier after her meeting, and the town staff meeting with HCD was not given back to this commission or the Housing Element Advisory Board or the town council after their meeting with HCD, after the consultants meeting with HCD. So changes in the process need to occur. And again, I appreciate all that you've done and wish you well. Thanks.
Thank you, sir, for your comments. And we have a final card from Mr. Alarcon.
Tony Alarcon, speaking on my own behalf. I just wanted to share something. Many of us head up to Tahoe and to Truckee quite often. Truckee has a population very similar to ours, a lot of affluent retirees. Like our town, we have a lot of affluent people. I want to say thank you for all your hard work from the Planning Commission. I looked at Truckee's housing element plan. They have a master plan called the Truckee Hilltop. It was approved in 2008. It's not yet been built. It's 300 units, 54,000 square feet of commercial, and a 60-room hotel. So for 15 years, that project hasn't been built. And looking at their housing element plan, the last submission from them was 2019. They submitted that plan on August the 30th, and it was approved on September the 16th. And I'm wondering, I sit back and I look at our town, and we're going through this whole process, and I think it echoes what the other speakers have expressed. I sincerely don't understand how this has taken so long, and it feels as there's been many errors, whether it's not keeping track of the consultants, the communication between departments, perhaps trying to overachieve and build too many units instead of simply complying with our arena numbers. It's mind-boggling to me. And I feel for the Planning Commission. I hope that our town citizens hear what I've said today and ponder that as well when you decide to vote in the next election and look for leadership within our town, that we need to streamline our process and we need to do better. And we need to be a leader with other towns, and instead of having these delays and having citizens not know what's going on, asking the Planning Commission to approve a plan before they've received a letter of comments from the HDC is not a valid approach. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any questions from commissioners? I don't see any. I don't have any more cards. Do we have anyone on Zoom?
We
Mr.
do.
Moore?
Thank you, Chair. So the first to speak will be Ron Meyer.
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes. I'm not going to be as complimentary or as condescending. I mean, not condescending. Complimentary. I'm actually going to call it the way it is and the way I've seen this process evolve over the last 12 to 14, 16 months, and the failure in the ability to inform the public, to manage the previous consultants in their 3 failed attempts, and the waste of $180,000 of taxpayer money. I see a level of incompetence in both the staff and the Planning Commission, because the Planning Commission has not basically taken the recommendations from the Housing Element Advisory Board and the Los Gatos Community Alliance seriously. There is some damn good analysis in both some of the HEB reports in the previous meetings and also the latest letter from the Los Gatos Community Alliance. The incompetence, the non-transparency, the confusion, the miscoordination, the oversight by the town council, and the usurpation of their power by the town staff and pieces of the Planning Commission is not favorable. It is not even remotely the way that this process should have been conducted. The citizens of Los Gatos deserve better. They deserve better in the town staff. They deserve better in the Planning Commission. And consequently, we're not being served properly at all. The process has been non-transparent, confusing, convoluted. The town council hasn't been doing their job in terms of exercising their oversight responsibilities over this whole process. So consequently, we, the town citizens, are going to end up paying for this because of that incompetence, that non-transparency, and the whole screwed up process from the beginning. You folks are reprehensible. I'm finished.
Thank you, sir. Are there any questions by commissioners? I don't see any. Thank you once more. Any other callers on Zoom, Mr. Paulson?
Thank you, Chair. Anyone else on Zoom who wishes to speak, please raise your hand. I don't see any hands raised, Chair.
Thank you very much. So I will now close the public portion of the meeting and again propose that the commissioners first discuss the procedural issues that have been raised by the Los Gatos Community Alliance concerning continuing the meeting to a date following Friday's anticipated receipt of HCD's comments on the submittals of November 16th and 28th, and that the public was not afforded the statutory time to comment on the housing element drafts. We haven't discussed that issue yet, and maybe it's a moot point depending on how our discussion goes, but I'd like to open and ask commissioners to comment on the request, the issue that we've already brought up about possible continuance to a different date. Commissioner Janoff. Commissioner Janoff, yes.
Thank you. We have an interesting problem in front of us. We have a timing issue that has been described by staff with regard to getting the adoption of the housing element in front of town council as soon as possible for the reasons stated, which makes sense. And we also have incomplete feedback from HCD. I can see a path forward, as I suggested earlier, where we can provide an approval, or recommended that the town council hear the item on the 19th, understanding that we may get more information. But if HCD on the 1st says, yes, you're in compliance, I would not want the Planning Commission to be the body that's holding up town council being able to hear this, and we will be if we don't recommend to town council tonight. So I'm separating, in my mind, I'm separating the task before us into making a recommendation timely for town council that will be after the Planning Commission has an opportunity to see the HCD comments, as well as public, as well as council, as well as anyone. And I would feel more comfortable if we had, assuming HCD says, yes, you're in compliance, I think that's fine, end of story. If HCD says on the 1st that we have work to do yet, I think we should reconvene the Planning Commission or Housing Element Advisory Board, whatever is appropriate, in order to be able to process that information and make recommendations going forward. So I feel like we can separate this and still provide a timely path for council should the letter be favorable on the 1st, but provide a backup in case it's not, so that the Planning Commission can review the information provided.
That sounds like possible elements of a motion, but I'll ask other commissioners if they have comments. Commissioner Hanson?
Well, as you all know, I was chair of the Housing Element Advisory Board, and we may or may not be meeting again, I'm not sure. As mentioned earlier, and as mentioned by the commenters, this is a very difficult situation to be in, to try and make a recommendation on something when we know 2 days later that we're going to get a letter from HCD. I wanted to point out a couple things. One thing that's really important is, irrespective of whatever decision was made before to hire other consultants that might not have been as effective, I've been very impressed with the work that Veronica Tam and her team have done with staff to move the housing element towards the finish line. And when that decision was made to hire her, I know as the Housing Element Advisory Board that when we had discussions about it, we felt that she had the best path forward to know how to take this thing over the finish line versus the members of the Housing Element Advisory Board who had less experience working with HCD. I mean, we don't interact directly with HCD at all in our role. And so I think that's important that she's been very integral to this process over the last few months. And when I look at the progress of the document, we never have had any comments from HCD that our site inventory isn't adequate. They wanted just more information on how to develop it. This new law with AFFH has been particularly difficult to deal with, but because of the experience of Veronica Tam with other jurisdictions, she has a clear directive of how to answer all those questions and do all the analysis that is required. That being the case, though, I do remain very uncomfortable with making a recommendation to approve something when I know that 2 days later it could be one or the other. And we have no assurances from anyone that HCD will or won't go forward. We can hope. As said, the document is in the best shape that it's been in a long time. One change that was made in the site inventory that I don't know if everyone has been able to observe. We had gotten comments on the 15th. There was a time earlier in this process, earlier this year, when it was thought that we could add in some sites from the previous cycle. And now there's been more clarity to take some of those out because of the date that you had to count, which was, I believe, June 30th of 2022, and it had to be after that date. When those sites were added back in, we had quite a bit of a larger buffer relative to our state mandated numbers. And we did get a lot of comments from the public saying that they were very uncomfortable with having more numbers, of units planned for. And now those numbers have been backed out as expected and directed by HCD, so that our current site inventory numbers and buffer to RENA is actually right in the range of what was always expected, which was a 15 to 20% buffer over the RENA of 1993 units. That being the case, there have been a lot of questions from the Los Gatos Community Alliance about projects that are in the site inventory, and I believe staff did answer all of those. I've read all the materials. I had looked through and seen that that staff did address those concerns about no net loss and when that would be recognized and some of the other concerns. But I do remain concerned about making a recommendation on something when we know that 2 days from now it could be one or the other. So it's going to be a scenario of we would go forward and HCD says yes, or they say no, or we continue and they say yes or say no. And the optimal circumstance would be where we would go forward and they would say yes, and then everything would be fine and town council could go ahead. But we don't know if that is possible. So I do like Commissioner Chanoff's suggestion about modifying how we would approve it. I think that might be better than continuing it and pushing it out into the new year, because there's more of a risk of the additional builder's remedy applications.
Thank you. Other commissioners? Commissioner Burnett.
This question is for staff. Thank you. What would happen if the Planning Commission did not vote to move it forward to the Town Council?
We just need a recommendation one way or the other. And so the recommendation can be, yes, we recommend approval, or we don't recommend approval. The law just requires that the Planning Commission make a recommendation.
What would be the consequence, though? I mean, what?
It would continue on to the Town Council ultimately for a decision as to whether or not to adopt the housing element.
So the town, just to continue, so the Town Council does not need our recommendation for them to move forward with it?
They need a recommendation in front of them to consider, and the recommendation can be either for approval or rejection. And I just wanted to follow on about the discussion of having the item returned to the Planning Commission. And so just so the Planning Commission is aware, that would mean that we'd be back on the schedule of being in front of the Town Council in January, just as a point of information.
Commissioner Janoff.
Just to clarify, if we if we were to recommend town council approve with the condition that planning commission meets if HCD provides a negative response on the first, are you saying that?
Yes, that returning, because we need the planning commission's recommendation to the town council, and so that would necessitate a return to the planning commission, meaning that the town council would most likely meet on the housing element in January.
But if the planning commission should vote to recommend town council adopt this draft of the housing element with the condition, I guess that would be the problem, is the condition. So there's no opportunity for the planning commission to reconvene if the response from HCD is negative without restarting the clock and pushing things out into January. That's what I'm hearing.
Right.
Yeah.
And through the chair, I would just add that if we get additional comments on December 1st, we are going to have to make revisions. So we are ultimately going to have to come back through the 7-day review of those revisions to Planning Commission for a recommendation and then council for another adoption. I think the one opportunity this provides, and the town attorney can correct me if I'm wrong, is even if we get comments on the first that need to be addressed, we imagine there will be far less of them than are currently in the most recent draft matrix. And so that would give an opportunity for the council to, even though it may not be the final version, they could be adopting a housing element that is much more in substantial compliance than the currently adopted one that was adopted in January. So I don't know if the town attorney has any additional comments on that.
No, but it looks like there's a question.
Yeah. So are you saying that Planning Commission could recommend to council to adopt the housing element draft, November draft, and HCD comments coming to staff on the 1st could indicate additional work? Council could consider additional comments if staff provides responses to HCD on those?
No, so it'd have to go through the same process. So staff and the consultant would prepare revisions to address those comments in the December 1st letter. And then they would, once those are prepared and completed, they would be circulated for the 7-day review period. Then we would come back to Planning Commission and you would make an adoption to council. So it's just an additional cycle, but this could potentially provide some benefit for a more substantially compliant housing element being in place in that December timeframe. But ultimately, obviously, that's a Planning Commission council decision.
So just to make sure I'm clear, it doesn't matter whether there's no downside to recommending council adopt because there are likely to be changes in more cycle. The purpose for recommending adoption is in case HCD comes back with a compliance, you're in compliance, and then council can go forward with the formal adoption of a
certifiable housing element.
Certifiable housing element.
Yeah, that's a good summary of the issue that's before the Planning Commission.
I have a question for Mr. Paulson. If I heard you right, you said that the latest submissions did trigger a 60-day public comment period?
That's technically correct. However, our reviewer has provided this opportunity for this interim, where he provided the interim matrix. And so he had previously committed, which we're hoping he's going to stand by, that he will incorporate that into his December 1st letter. So that is our hope. Obviously, we won't know until we see the letter on the 1st. But technically, because it is a formal submittal, it does trigger a 60-day review. However, that is not our understanding of how they're going to review this at this point.
Okay. Commissioner Jenoff?
I just want to make sure I heard you correctly. It's not a 60-day public review, it's a 60-day HCD review.
I think I misspoke. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Other comments? Well, let me make sure I understand what's being said so far, that if we were to make a recommendation to the town council to approve the November 16th and 27th submissions, that in the event HCD has material changes to that, that it would of necessity come back to the Planning Commission again.
That's correct.
Okay. So in light of that, do we have a motion? Commissioner Jennifer?
In light of that, which is pretty important, I think, I move to recommend that the Planning Commission recommend to the Town Council to adopt the housing element draft that was officially submitted to them on November 28th, 2023.
And if you could please reference the resolution that was provided to you in the addendum report.
Can you?
It'll just, the motion would be to adopt a resolution recommending approval.
So stated.
Through the chair. Do we have to add a qualification then about the HCD's response, that if they respond with further changes, that will trigger some further action as part of the motion?
Staff would recommend that this be a clean recommendation adoption of the resolution as written, with the understanding that if there are significant comments that require additional revisions, that we would go through the required process.
Thank you.
Is staff suggesting that we specifically refer to the form of the resolution that was included in the staff packet?
Yes, adoption of the resolution that has been provided does include the specific references to the November draft.
And for the record, that's Exhibit 6, I believe.
Does the maker of the motion include that?
Yes, I think it has been included, but thank you.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Vice Chair Respi?
I'll second the motion.
Is there a discussion? If not, I'll call the question. Those in favor, raise your hand. Oh, I'm sorry.
I have a comment. I'm very uncomfortable with this process. I think I already said this, and I was okay if we could make a recommendation subject to the HCD approval, but I don't think I'm okay with making a recommendation on something when it's a who knows what's going to happen on Friday. So I don't know if I can vote for it.
Commissioner Janoff?
Thank you. I think based on what we just heard from staff, that we will have the opportunity to see HCD comments if they are asking for additional input from the town. We'll have that opportunity. It's not that the recommendation effectively assumes HCD comments. In order for the recommendation to go fully forward to council, it presumes that the response on the first will be a positive response, you're in compliance response. That's what it assumes. I don't think that we're doing. I agree that the process is not ideal. It has been confusing, and it is because we have this time frame of council meeting, and it's the end of the year, and we've limited meetings to go forward with this, and the noticing challenges of having weeks in order to make sure the public is aware of what's on council agenda really boxes us in. But as I said before, this recommendation to adopt the resolution it presumes HCD will be positive, because we know that if HCD's response on the first is send us more information, then council won't. Well, I guess it could still adopt the housing element, knowing that there would be more work to do and more cycles to go through. So either way, it'll come back to us if there's more work to be done, and I'm comfortable with that.
Commissioner Burnett?
Yeah, my comment. As it stands now as a planning commissioner, I cannot recommend the adoption of the draft housing element to the town council. To make a recommendation 2 days before we're actually receiving HCD's letter on October 2nd, 2023 housing element version, in my view, would be sort of irresponsible, and not being able to properly deliberate HCD's comments letter would be, in my opinion, a violation of the Planning Commission's fiduciary duty of care. So I would not be supporting the motion.
Commissioner Raspy.
Thank you, Chair. And, just my viewpoint, I think, is largely in accordance with Commissioner Janoff's. I'm voting for what's been submitted, what's before us today, what's been submitted to HCD on the 28th. That's what's, I think, encapsulated in our approval this evening. We would know what that is. And my vote is that I approve of that for the housing amount for town council. If HCD comes back with further comments, that's not part of our approval. Then that becomes part of further discussion, either through town council or through planning commission. But as far as what we're approving this evening, at least with my vote, it will be what's presented to us in staff tonight and what's been transmitted to HCD as of yesterday. I'm comfortable with what's in that package. I'll reserve further judgment in the event that HCD comes back with anything but a positive. And so I hope that clarifies my position.
I share the feeling of my fellow commissioners that we've been put in a very, very difficult position tonight. It echoes back to the meeting on the 15th when we were presented with, the next morning, with an entirely new package and matrix. It's good that we're making progress on these issues, but I think the public perception, partly of what we've heard tonight, is that there's some chaos in the process. I'm sympathetic to those who are against the motion because it demonstrates to the public that we are inserting a more deliberate and focused consideration of the issues rather than anticipating rather than presenting the scenario where HCD comes back with something negative in 2 days, and then we'll have to revisit it. Whereas today we're seeming to approve it. That doesn't sit well with me in terms of public relations. But as a practical matter, I think that the motion makes complete sense. I think that there's no reason to delay. There's some certain interest that we have in preventing more builder remedies applications. We already have plenty of those. So I would be in support of the motion. And if there's no other comments, we'll take the roll.
Is it okay?
Please.
Is it okay to ask more question? So there was a letter in the desk item from the Los Gatos Community Alliance in which they made several recommendations, and one of them was partially cited by Commissioner Burnett, saying it would be irresponsible and a violation of the Planning Commissioner's fiduciary duty of care to make any recommendation to the Town Council prior to receiving and properly deliberating HCD's comment letter on the October 2nd, 2023 version. Since there's the meeting, the new letter is expected 2 days after the meeting, and they go on to say they feel that it was a mistake that we made the recommendation on January 11th, and so on and so forth. So they made several recommendations in there, and while staff did respond to the comments from their letter on the 27th, there was no time to comment on this because it came in a desk item. So what is staff's opinion on this statement that it's a violation, an irresponsible violation of our fiduciary duty of care to make this recommendation?
From my perspective, the Planning Commission is being asked to decide whether the revised draft housing element that's been presented to the Planning Commission substantially complies with all of the government code requirements. And so if a planning commissioner is able to make a decision that it does, then that's not a violation of the planning commissioner's fiduciary duty.
Okay.
We still have a motion on the table. Remind me, does the resolution that is on the table for approval, including the findings in terms of compliance on all housing element requirements?
Yes.
Okay, I thought so. Any further discussion? Commissioner Hanson.
I have one other question. A concern I had, and I do appreciate all the analysis that staff has done. I want to make sure that I say that. The response in the matrix is excellent. It looks to me like everything is covered. But, and then there's the statement of, that was submitted a couple days ago from staff about all the things with the state law. But the problem that I have with that is it's coming from us relative to our work versus, HCD, which has been holding this over not just our heads, but other jurisdictions' heads. So then, we can say that it's in substantial compliance based on our opinion, but it's really HCD that's going to make the ultimate recommendation. So it seems like a hollow kind of recommendation. Because we have these charts that are coming from us, not from HCD.
Commissioner Jenoff.
And while it's true that the matrix has been prepared by staff, it's been deeply informed by our expert consultant. And so I do respect that the work of Ms. Tam and her team is foundationally aware and informed of these metrics of compliance. And I'm comfortable that with that oversight, that the compliance matrix as presented, which is excellent, by the way, it's exactly what I was hoping to see, satisfies for me that the document is in substantial compliance. And not just because it's been self-developed, but it has had external review.
Thank you. Other discussion? Don't see anything, so I'm going to call the question on the motion. Those in favor, raise your hand, please. And those against? So the motion passes 5-1.
The vote was 4-1 for the record, with Commissioner Burnett voting no.
Thank you. Thank you. That's not the first time I've miscounted. Must have been my math teacher. Okay, so we have other items on the agenda that we'll move to next.
No, we do not have any further items on tonight's agenda.
I saw them on the agenda. Commissioner reports, staff report from the director. No?
I don't believe so, but I will check. Oh, you're right. We do have it listed on here on tonight's agenda. We didn't have it on the 15th.
Right. So we'll move on to those items. And I believe there's no other business that's before the commission tonight. And so we'll move on to the report from our planning manager, Jennifer Armour.
Thank you. I do not have anything to report this evening.
Okay, thank you. And do we have any subcommittee reports? I don't think we do. Okay, so that being concluded, I'll call the meeting adjourned.